Hello, 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 and welcome back to Wellywood Wargaming. My name is Damon, and in this episode we're going to be taking a trip back to the Underhive, looking at Necromunda scenarios. Now, I've been kind of meaning to do a video like this for quite a while now, really, so better late than never, I suppose, but I know that many of you have been asking for a video on scenarios, just clearing up some of the flotsam and jetsam and massive amount of information that we've got there. Like anything with Necromunda, there's just often too much stuff to plough through, and it's my job to give you that information in sort of bite-sized nuggets, I suppose, to make it slightly more digestible. I hope I'm doing my job well at that anyway. I know that some of you really appreciate this, so great, thank you. Please do like, share, subscribe, and continue to support me in my endeavours when it comes to specialist wargaming. Anyway, without further ado, I thought we'd just get straight into it. Now, we're going to be talking about scenarios in Necromunda. Now, what are scenarios, I suppose? To those of you that know, that's fine. Those of you that don't, Necromunda is best played with scenarios. So what I mean by that is you're not just setting up like a game of chess. You've actually got objectives and set sort of fluffy narrative ways of playing the game, I suppose. So that's what your scenarios are, and at the moment I think we're up to 180 or something scenarios. I don't know, off the top of my head, it's an awful lot of scenarios. Absolutely masses. Some of them good, some of them bad. You can go onto websites like Goonhammer, actually. Shout out to Goonhammer, and you can have a look at some of their articles that they've done on which scenarios are good, which scenarios are bad. You might agree with some of those, you might not. I could probably give you that sort of information too, and it'll probably be much the same as Goonhammer, to be honest. But now that I'm doing this with a slightly more up-to-date view of the whole thing, there are an awful lot of scenarios in the game to get through, so you don't have to read them all. I suppose go and pick some out off the Goonhammer thing, and that'll be a good place to start. Anyway, the first thing you need to think about with Necromunda scenarios is the format in which you're actually playing the game. Now, Necromunda, I suppose, to many people, when they think of Necromunda, they think of 3D, dense, underhive terrain, and that's the kind of thing that sets it apart, really, from a lot of other games. It's played on really dense 3D, multi-leveled terrain, and you're firing through lots of heavy cover and stuff like that. That's how N95 was played, and that's awesome. However, and that's called Sector Mechanicus, by the way. Sector Mechanicus is Games Workshop's fancy term for 3D terrain. That's all it means. It means 3D terrain. Doesn't have to be Games Workshop terrain. Can be Blue Peter, sticky back plastic and cardboard terrain, which is sometimes often best, in fact. Or it can be 3D printed proxy stuff as well. Whatever you like, it's up to you. But Sector Mechanicus just means 3D. That's all it means. You then have Zone Mortalis. Now, Zone Mortalis is also a Games Workshop fancy word, and this fancy word came out with 2018's version of the game with your Goliath and Asher core box set, which I know is 5 years old now already, which is crazy. But when Necromunda was reissued, everybody from 95 freaked out and were like, I'm not playing this game, this is ridiculous, it's on 2D, how dare they not give us 3D terrain, how dare they? And I was one of those people, I'll be honest, but I bought the box set, I played the hell out of it, and I loved the Zone Mortalis, and I loved the 2D, and it's kind of like playing Hero Quest crossed with Necromunda. It's really claustrophobic, it's really great, the tiles are awesome. And that's just another way that you can play it. Of course, they came out later with some 3D terrain and some plastics, and that's all fantastic too. And many people are purists and they only play on 3D. Many people only play on the 2D. It's pretty rare, though, to be honest. But I can tell you that both of them are great. And when you're running a campaign, if you're playing scenarios on both formats, it's awesome. I actually did a big multiplayer the other day with 9 players, a sort of special custom dungeon crawler kind of scenario with one ganger per member. And when I was actually setting up at the club the other day, setting up all the tiles, a bunch of people came over and were like, where are these tiles from? Are these Games Workshop and stuff? And I was like, yeah, it's the core box from 2018. And a lot of them didn't even know. So yeah, it's an option. They're quite hard to get hold of now. I'm sure you can probably get some proxy versions of the tiles, but if you've got them and if you've got Bad Zone Delta like I have, then I think they're fantastic. I use them often. Moving on, I'm already rambling a little bit because that's what I do. The last sort of formats, you've got your 3D, you've got your 2D, Zone Mortalis and Sector Mechanicus, respectively. You've then got your Ash Waste scenarios as well. So what that means is Ash Wastes is still 3D, but involving vehicles. So we can't have as much densely packed terrain as you would have in an Underhive scenario or setting. What that means is you've got less terrain generally. You've still got the hab blocks and stuff that you can use from Games Workshop, which are fantastic, by the way. But you might want more space. You might want some roads on the board as well. So that's what I mean by ash wastes. The next thing you need to think about is the size of the board that you're playing on, but that's probably a whole other video to talk about, really. But generally boards, Necromunda boards anyway, as opposed to 40k boards, are played on a 4x4 foot square board or a 3x3 board. I would say over time, I used to prefer 4x4. I now prefer a 3x3 board. I'm saying it. I've said it. You can play a 2x2 board as well, or any other shape, to be honest. It's completely up to you. But optimal gaming for me on 3D terrain or ash wastes terrain, I like 3x3. I find that 4x4 often means that the first turn of the game is just movement and boring sort of moving around. That's great if you're really into the tactical element, but if you want to just play a quick game, get in each other's faces and have fun, 3x3 or 2x2 is often better. Anyway, I'm rambling again. So moving on now. Now, most people probably think that Necromunda is a 1v1 game. It's not. There are solo scenarios, and they're not particularly good, but they are there. So you can play Necromunda solo if you really want to. You can play it however you want, really, honestly. But there are some preset solo scenarios, one or two anyway, and they're quite complicated for new players, I think. I haven't actually played them myself, but I read the rules and I've thought, don't know about that. But I'm lucky. I have lots of players that I can play with. If you're out in the open and if you live in the middle of nowhere in a wood or something, in a hut in the woods, in a cabin in the woods, and you've got no mates to play with, then play those solo scenarios. You'll probably love them. You've also got multiplayer scenarios as well. So, scenarios that are actually made specifically for more than 2 players. So 3, 4, 5, however many you like. Those scenarios are pretty fair and pretty evenly balanced, I suppose, if you can use the word balance with Necromunda. Rarely, I say. But those actual multiplayer scenarios are geared specifically for more than 2 players. But having said that, you can pretty much make any of the 2-player scenarios in the game into multiplayer scenarios if you wish. It just means that you might have to do a little bit of tweaking with the rewards and some of the stuff, some of the flotsam and jetsam in the actual scenario itself to make it multiplayer. But we have done so and it works. The next thing is sort of scenario themes. So what we're talking about here is the sort of type of scenario that you've got, because there are still, we're up to nearly 200 scenarios or I think, something like that. Some of them are sort of just gang fights, so scenarios that it's just 1v1. It's very fair, it's very even, it's very balanced. Again, I don't like you using that word with Necromunda, but it's there. So it's just you're fighting with your opponent. That's it. There's not much more to think about. Kill your enemy, crush your enemies, and hear the lamentation of their women. That's pretty much what that is. The next thing is sort of objective based, so similar to 40k in that you've got some physical objectives, whether it's like power nodes or whether it's like a gunk tank or something like that. There's a physical objective on the board that you've actually got to do to win. You've then got your monster based scenarios, which like involve hunting a monster or killing a monster, whether that's helping each other or fighting each other while you're doing it. You've then got rescue missions like your public execution, which is fantastic, by the way. That's an excellent one. And then you've got your sort of prison break, stuff like that, where you've actually got to rescue a gang fighter, and that's more fluffy and narrative as well, which is nice. You've got loot scenarios, where it's just you and your opponent trying to get as much loot as possible. You've got more narrative scenarios, and you've got, house and gang-themed ones as well. So ones that came specifically in a house book, like, say, for example, the Book of Faith, has some scenarios for Cawdor. They can be played by any gang, but they are kind of designed for one of those gangs being a Cawdor gang, for example. So that's the sort of scenario themes that we're talking about. We've then got special scenarios. So there are a number of special scenarios that don't fit the general sort of, I suppose, gist of the rest of the scenarios, and that is gang raids. The gang raids was a little supplement that came out with some really short, deliberately short games that you could play in Necromunda involving very small crews. Those are pretty cool. Those scenarios are great. You can play several of them in a night. Feels more like you're playing Warcry, to be honest. You've then got Apocrypha Necromunda, which are on the Warhammer community. There have been 5 or 6 Apocrypha Necromunda scenarios. They are narrative one-off scenarios that Games Workshop has written. Really, really cool. often throwing in new elements to the game, whether it's a new psychic power, whether it's a new weapon, something like that. So do go and check the Warhammer community and download the PDFs for these before they disappear, because Games Workshop PDFs do eventually disappear. I've learnt that the hard way with all the Aeronautica Imperialis stuff recently. So Apocrypha Necromunda, go and check out those scenarios. They have really, really cool narrative fluff written in there as well. And in fact, I did a battle report on one of them recently between Corpse Grinders and Delac, which was quite cool. And it gave the Corpse Grinders some extra skills, and it gave the Delac some more psychic powers as well, or Psychoterica, I think we're talking about. You've then got some hanger-on scenarios, which I think were published in White Dwarf. There's a Dome Runner one, which is excellent. There's a Ammo Jack one, which is great as well. What's the other one? There's a Rogue Dock one, I think, as well, which is really cool. So those are some extra scenarios that you can get in the game, which revolve around those particular hangers-on from Forge World. And then you've got Open Hive War. Now, Open Hive War was a card pack that Games Workshop released a couple of years ago now. I was lucky enough to get one because I know that as soon as something like this comes out, you really need to get it before it goes out of production. It has gone out of production. It's like trying to find... I don't know, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack now if you really want some, and they're going to cost you an arm and a leg on eBay, unfortunately. But it's a deck of cards with 4 different types of cards in there. You've got your objective, your deployment, your peril, and your loot. So if you're familiar with Warcry, does that sound familiar? It's very, very similar indeed. Deployment, so this is basically a way of generating random custom scenarios. So your deployment will tell you where you and your opponent are deploying on the game, much like a normal scenario. You've then got your objective, so what you've actually got to do, whether it's take out the enemy leader, do this, do that. You've then got a peril, which is just like a twist in Warcry, so like a something bad that's happening in the game. And then you've got loot as well, so what your winnings are, or what loot there is available in the actual game. Really, really good, but they can probably be found online, to be honest. If you can't afford the card pack, or you don't have the card pack, I imagine someone much cleverer than me has probably made some sort of app where you can actually do this. In fact, I pretty much guarantee someone has, but I just don't know where it is, unfortunately. You have to go looking for it on Yak Tribe or Goonhammer or something. Try Reddit, actually. Anyway, that's the sort of main stuff about scenarios that you're going to need to know. The next thing I'm going to talk about are the scenario specifics. So this is how a scenario is actually laid out, and these are the headings that you've got in each scenario as well. So the first one is the sort of intro and spiel to the actual scenario. So at the top, it'll give you the name of the scenario, and it will tell you what the scenario represents in game from a narrative perspective. This is pretty cool. Some of them are very, very short, some of them are long, but it's nice to have a little bit of extra fluff there anyway. But don't expect pages and pages, it's just a tiny little paragraph usually. The first little heading you've got is attacker defender, so this will tell you whether, who's the attacker and who's the defender. Usually the person that chooses the scenario is the attacker. But it depends how you do it in your group. I suppose how you choose your scenarios in your group is entirely up to you. But yeah, one will usually be the attacker, one will usually be the defender. In multiplayer scenarios, there's usually no attacker and defender. And sometimes in the 1v1s, there's no attacker and defender either. But that will differ slightly in terms of how many fighters that you get and the stuff that you've got to actually do in the game to win it. The next thing you've got is crew. Now this will be one of two things. It'll either be random or custom and a number. So what that means is if you've got a random and a number, say random 5, your crew you've got to choose your crew randomly, I suppose. So instead of actually getting to choose by custom, you either roll for the fighters that turn up, or you have their fighter cards and you just select them randomly to see who turns up, who doesn't. It's quite fun and fluffy, but it can be a bit brutal if your opponent gets all their best guys and you just get Jews. But that's just the nature of Necromunda. It can be really fun that way as well. But then you've got custom as well. So there are some scenarios where you can actually choose the fighters that turn up, and you can choose to, omit people who you don't want playing as well as the ones that you do want playing. The next thing, and it's a bit of a bone of contention, I suppose, is tactics cards. Now, there are various groups. Some of you out there hate tactics cards and have admitted them entirely from the game. That's fine. It does add a layer of complexity to an already complex system. However, I do think they add quite a lot of value to the game and quite a lot of tactical depth to the game as well. I think that they should be included. However, I do believe that they need to be entirely house ruled because there are some tactics cards which are just incredibly broken and need to be omitted entirely. However, it's up to you how you and your group do it. So talk to your arbitrator or have an arbitrator if you're not, maybe you're the arbitrator. Just have a look at the tactics cards. I've done a video about tactics cards, so you can have a look at that. It was my top favourite tactics cards in the game, but that was about 6 months ago. After that, we've got deployment. So the deployment is, it's the same as what I just mentioned with Open Hive War. So this is telling you where the attacker and defender, or whichever gangs are playing in the game, are deployed on the board, whether they're in the middle, whether they're on the sides, whatever, how far into the board they're deployed as well. This will tell you in the deployment section. The next thing we've got is fleeing the battlefield. So again, this is something that might need house ruling, but if voluntary or none, you lose. That should be a house rule. That's what I've put in there. That's not currently rules as written, but I would say that if you voluntarily pull out of a game in any game, you should lose. Really, that's common sense. That's kind of how it should be. Otherwise, you could achieve the objective and just fuck off. And it's not really fair for your opponent. So I think if you run off in the game, you lose. It's really that simple. Ending the battle is the next section here. And this is, we usually tell you that the end of the game is by turn X, so a particular amount of turns, whether it's like 6 turns or 9 turns or something, or when an actual objective has actually been completed in the game as well. You've then got the victory conditions as well, which is similar, but this is how the winner is decided, I suppose, and how the winner and loser are determined in the game. The next section is quite important, and that's rewards. So this will tell you how many credits you get for playing the game, whether you're the winner or the loser. Sometimes the loser gets more credits than the winner, and that's fine. And there's also XP and rep as well. Rep is used for getting hangers on, and also just the rep table in a campaign. But XP is probably the most important thing here. How much XP you get in games is really important. Now, it's a separate video here, but I think that the current version of Necromunda has too many credits in it and not much XP. So if you're new to the game and you want to arbitrate your own, campaign, then I strongly suggest that you put a cap on credits and you somehow raise the value of XP, whether you double it or add extra XP in games. I just think it's better. I do that in my campaigns here. And usually with all of the scenarios in the entire game, in my group anyway, I cap the winnings to no more than 46 times 10 credits per gang. So you can never win more than that. I think that's a good limit. It's probably still quite generous, but it's just good to put a cap on it, because there are some scenarios, Caravan Heist and a few others, which just give you too many credits, and people can play them over and over again. On that note, actually, I would say another good house rule to throw in is that you may only play one scenario once per campaign, so that you don't just keep farming all the best ones and trying to get all the best money and stuff. Moving on anyway. So that was your rewards. The next thing is the home turf advantage. So the next few things aren't necessarily written down on a scenario, but they're parts of some of the scenarios, the ingredients in some of the scenarios that you're going to need to know about. The first one is home turf advantage. What that means is, if you're the defender in some scenarios, you tend to get a little bonus, whether that is 2d6 to your bottle roll instead of 1d6, and you choose. Things like that. That's a rule as well, home turf advantage. You've then got sneak attack. So this is a type of scenario where the defender has all their gangs set up as sentries. So they move around randomly, you have to roll for it, and you see where they move and stuff like that. And if a sentry is alerted, the alarm goes off. This is really fun, a really cool way to play the game, but usually means that the defender certainly is on the back foot in most games. However, they do usually have reinforcements when the alarm's gone off. The next thing is loot caskets. So every single game will have loot caskets and ammo caches in it, pretty much. And loot caskets are either full of a little bit of money, or they go boom boom on a 1. So if you open a loot casket and it explodes in your face, then that seems to happen more often than not. It's only a 1 in 6 chance, but it seems to happen every time, if you're me. So yeah, loot caskets are a thing. The next thing is reinforcements. So reinforcements, I think this is where you'll have your crew, but it will then tell you how many reinforcements you have. Your reinforcements come on often where you want them, but sometimes where your opponent wants them. You tend to roll for it. But here's another house rule for you on the reinforcements front, I believe, and I think that your reinforcements should be included in your total crew amount at the start of the game, meaning that you don't just have 3 fighters on the board counting for your bottle checks and 10 reinforcements. The entire lot should count for your bottle checks, if you ask me. That's just a personal personal house rule there, I think. But again, I'm rambling already. The next one is ammo caches. Very similar to your loot caskets. This just gives you extra ammo and free reloads, things like that. You also got booby traps. Again, self-explanatory. You've got frag, melter, gas, things like that that can be in the scenarios as well. Gang relics, which offer close-by boons and often need protecting. So there's some scenarios where you actually have to attack your opponent's relic. You might both have a relic, and you've got to attack the opponent's relic, etc. That's pretty common, and they're pretty good. You need to defend those guys. You've then got the Beast's Lair and markers for Beast's Lair. The Beast's Lair is pretty brutal, just bad times in general, but also pretty fun. Like if you find one of your fighters on their own, away from the rest of your gang, they have got quite a high likelihood of getting attacked by strange tentacles that come out of grills and vents and things like that. And usually it's a really bad time. So that's a thing there as well. And that's Horrors in the Dark and Beast's Lair together, I suppose. And the last thing that we're going to talk about with scenarios is just your sort of greeblies and creatures, all the critters and stuff that you get in Necromunda. Some of them show up in scenarios, whether it's hunting a Chimerix or whether they are some hive rats or some brainleaf zombies, things like that. There's loads of cool stuff that you can have in the scenarios in Necromunda, but yeah, in terms of the actual specific scenarios, I'm not going to give you a breakdown of which ones are good, which ones are bad. I think you should go and just have a look at them, but that should give you some insight into how to play, I suppose, Necromunda and which scenarios and sort of types that you can kind of pick. I might do a follow-up to this video, actually, just sort of maybe giving you a sort of tiering system or something. I don't know. Please do comment down below. Let me know what you'd like to follow this up with, because I'm sure I could follow it up with some more information around specific scenarios, I suppose. But in the meantime, without keeping this video too bloated and Nurgle-ish, we're gonna end it here. So thank you for watching. Again, please do like, share, subscribe, and check out the Patreon as well if you'd like to support me directly. And I will catch you in the next video. Peace out.